The laughter around the dinner table stopped the moment my wife opened her mouth. Her words sharp, deliberate cut through the noise like glass shattering on tile. She smiled, the kind of smile people use when they want to wound politely. "Let's all raise a glass to Nathan," she said sweetly. "He's proof that ambition isn't for everyone." A few nervous chuckles. Her father smirked. My throat burned, but I stayed silent. It wasn't the first time Claudia had embarrassed me, but that night felt different, calculated. And as I forced a smile, pretending not to care, I caught my daughter's eyes across the table. Emily's little hands were trembling, but her stare was steady, cold, almost defiant. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, precise, and devastating. "Mom, I know your secret." 6 words. That's all it took to make my wife's face turn white. And to change everything. I used to think silence kept the peace. For years, I convinced myself that letting Claudia talk over me, correct me, even laugh at me in front of others, was just part of being a patient husband. She was loud, confident, successful. I was steady, quiet, predictable. We balanced each other, or so I told myself. Claudia built her career on charisma. She could charm an entire boardroom before I finished a sentence. She loved the spotlight, and she wore success like perfume, strong enough for everyone to notice. Me. I taught high school history in a small Texas district. My students respected me. My colleagues liked me. But to Claudia, my job was just a reminder of how small I'd settled. She used to say, "You could have done so much more if you just believed in yourself." It sounded like encouragement, but it always left a bruise. In public, she played the part of the supportive wife, touching my arm when she needed to look affectionate, praising me just enough to seem kind. But behind closed doors, she rolled her eyes when I mentioned lesson plans or my students' essays. To her, teaching wasn't ambition, it was failure disguised as purpose. Still, I tried. I made dinner when she came home late from meetings. I handled the bills, the groceries, the yard. I took Emily to school every morning, packed her lunches, helped her with science projects. When Claudia's family visited, I did my best to fit into their polished, picture-perfect world. They never made it easy. Her father, Harold, treated me like an unpaid intern in his own house, polite, but dismissive. He'd ask about my little teaching job with a grin that told me he didn't consider it real work. Her mother, Lorraine, praised Claudia constantly, slipping subtle jabs about how lucky I was to have such a driven wife. And Claudia's brother, Davido, he was the worst. A self-proclaimed investment genius who never missed a chance to compare his earnings to mine. "You must really love what you do, Nathan," he'd say between sips of scotch. "Because it sure isn't about the paycheck." I always laughed it off. That was my role, the quiet one, the steady one, the man who swallowed pride for the sake of family harmony. But what Claudia didn't know was that I'd been keeping my own secret. 3 months earlier, her company had been on the verge of a lawsuit, one that could have ended her career. A client accused her firm of misusing proprietary data. She panicked. She cried. And while she was busy saving face at the office, I quietly found the flaw in the client's claim. My research hours of reading legal reports and cross-referencing data saved her. I never asked for credit. I didn't need it. I was just happy to help. But lately, watching the way she looked at me as though I were an accessory instead of a husband, I started to wonder if staying silent was the same as letting her forget who I really was. And deep down, I feared the day someone else would remind her. The night of the Hale family dinner started like every other performance, Claudia in her element, me in the background. Her parents' house looked like something out of a magazine spread: gold-rimmed plates, crystal glasses, a chandelier bright enough to expose every flaw in a person's smile. I had dressed carefully, navy suit, pressed shirt, no tie. Claudia said it made me look approachable but not important. She floated around the room, greeting relatives, laughing that effortless, expensive laugh that always made me feel like I was watching a stranger. Every time someone asked about her job, her tone grew louder, her gestures bigger, like a queen recounting the glory of her latest conquest. I stayed close to Emily, helping her arrange napkins, listening to her whisper questions about the guests. She was 12, clever beyond her years, and lately, too quiet when Claudia spoke. When everyone finally sat down, Claudia took her place at the head of the table, Harold on her right, Lorraine on her left. I was further down, next to Emily, which was her doing. "You'll be more comfortable near the kids' end," she'd said earlier, pretending not to notice the sting. Dinner began smoothly. The conversation was harmless at first: stocks, vacations, politics. Then David, her brother, turned the topic toward careers. "So, Nathan," he said, smirking, "still teaching those teenagers about dead presidents?" A few polite laughs rippled around the table. I smiled, nodded. "Actually, we've been studying civic responsibility this semester. It's interesting seeing how much it still applies." David leaned back, grinning. "Yeah, sure. Nothing like shaping the next generation one essay at a time." Claudia's lips curved in that familiar, careful smile. "He's passionate about what he does," she said, and for a moment I thought she might defend me. But then she added, "Of course, not everyone measures success the same way. Some people dream big, and some prefer stability." The air shifted. Her mother murmured approval. Harold chuckled softly. My face grew warm, but I kept my posture straight, steady. "I think stability is underrated," I said, forcing a laugh. "It keeps the world running." Claudia tilted her head, swirling her wine. "True. But sometimes stability can look a lot like fear of taking chances." There it was, the knife behind the compliment. Lorraine reached over, patting her daughter's hand. "Not everyone's built for ambition, dear. You can't expect Nathan to understand what it takes to compete at your level." Emily stiffened beside me. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She looked between me and her mother, as if trying to decide whether to speak. I gave her a small shake of the head. "Not tonight." But Claudia wasn't finished. She was glowing now, feeding on the attention. "Honestly, I admire Nathan's calm nature," she said, her tone sugar-sweet. "It takes confidence to be okay with staying small." Laughter again. Even David joined in. I stared at the candle flame in front of me, focusing on its tiny flicker, anything to keep from reacting. Emily reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her small fingers trembled, but her grip was strong. That was the moment I realized this dinner wasn't about family, it was about hierarchy. Claudia needed to prove she was above me, that her success justified her pride. And her family, willing audience that they were, applauded every line. When the laughter died, Harold raised his glass. "To Claudia," he said proudly. "Our shining star." I joined the toast, because not doing so would have made things worse. The wine burned my throat. Across the table, Emily's eyes were fixed on her mother. They weren't the soft, trusting eyes of a child anymore, they were sharp, calculating. Watching. Remembering. Something inside her had shifted. I could see it. She wasn't just hurt, for Mesh was angry. I didn't know it then, but that silent fury in my daughter's gaze was the beginning of the end for Claudia's perfect little world. A few weeks before that disastrous dinner, our marriage had already started cracking, only Claudia didn't notice the sound. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. It began one ordinary Tuesday evening. Claudia had come home late, her heels clicking like gunfire against the hardwood floor. I was sitting at the kitchen table, grading papers, when she dropped her bag on the counter and muttered, "You wouldn't understand the kind of pressure I'm under, Nathan. Real pressure." I didn't argue. I rarely did. But I did understand. Because that same week, I'd accidentally overheard a phone call that changed everything. She'd been in the study, pacing back and forth, voice sharp and trembling. If that contract leaks, she said to whoever was on the other end, I'm finished. The firm will hang me for it. There was a pause, then Claudia hissed, just stall them. I'll figure something out. But she didn't. She spent the next few days pretending everything was fine, walking around the house like a woman rehearsing calm. What she didn't know was that, after she'd gone to bed one night, I found her laptop open on the dining table. One document still glowed on the screen, pending legal response confidential. I didn't mean to pry. I really didn't. But one line jumped out at me: a client's accusation that her firm had used proprietary data from a competitor. It was a serious charge, and it wasn't even Claudia's fault. The marketing team she managed had unknowingly used open-source material that mirrored a competitor's project. A misunderstanding, but a potentially fatal one. And I knew how to fix it. I spent that entire night poring over case studies, corporate policies, and intellectual property regulation stuff I had no business understanding but somehow did. By morning, I had found the clause that cleared her team entirely. The next day, I emailed her assistant from my own account with a polite note and all the supporting research. 2 weeks later, Claudia came home glowing. Crisis averted, she said, tossing her coat over a chair. Turns out, the claim was bogus. My boss said it was the best response he's ever seen. She didn't mention me. Not once. I wanted to tell her it was my research, that I'd stayed up until sunrise making sure her reputation stayed intact. But when I opened my mouth, she was already moving on, talking about her new promotion, the praise she'd gotten, how proud her parents would be. So I stayed silent. I let her believe she'd saved herself. Later that night, Emily came into my study. She was supposed to be in bed, but I heard her small voice from the doorway. Dad, why didn't you tell Mom you helped her? I froze. You heard that? She nodded, stepping into the room, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. I heard Mom on the phone. She was crying. And then I saw you on the computer, writing things. You fixed it, didn't you? I tried to smile, but it faltered. Sometimes, sweetheart, it's better to let people take the credit if it keeps things peaceful. Emily frowned, thinking hard. But that's lying. It's not exactly lying, I said, though even I didn't believe it. It's keeping the peace. She didn't respond right away. Then she whispered, maybe keeping peace isn't the same as keeping quiet. Those words hit harder than any insult Claudia had ever thrown. After that night, Emily started watching her mother more closely. She wasn't rude or rebellious, just observant. When Claudia bragged about her hard work at dinner, Emily's eyes flickered toward me. When Claudia corrected me in front of guests, Emily's jaw tightened. I thought she was just learning disappointment early. I didn't realize she was collecting evidence. The promise I made to myself that week was simple: I'd never let Claudia's pride infect our daughter's heart. I'd shield Emily from it, even if it meant enduring every cutting remark in silence. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that Emily had already made a promise of her own. A quiet vow whispered to herself in the dark. That one day, she'd make her mother tell the truth. The night of the dinner was supposed to be a celebration. At least, that's what Claudia called it. A small family gathering, she'd said, brushing past me while checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. Just to mark the company's new expansion. Don't overthink it, Nathan, just be yourself. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. Being myself was exactly what embarrassed her the most. By 6 o'clock, the house was spotless, the wine perfectly chilled, and the smell of roasted lamb filled the air. Emily helped me set the table while Claudia rehearsed her speech upstairs. She wasn't practicing gratitude, she was practicing control: how to direct attention, how to sound humble without being humble. Do I really have to wear this? Emily asked, tugging at the pale blue dress her mother had chosen. You look beautiful, I said softly. Your mom just wants everything to look perfect tonight. Emily sighed. Everything except us. Before I could respond, Claudia appeared at the top of the stairs in a crimson dress that screamed authority. She paused, scanning the room like a general before a battle. Nathan, fix that centerpiece, seat's crooked. And Emily, please stop slouching. You look uninterested. I am uninterested, Emily muttered under her breath. Claudia didn't hear her. She was already busy straightening napkins that were perfectly fine. The guests began to arrive just after 7. Harold was first, with his booming voice and a new cigar between his fingers. Ah, there's my girl, he said, hugging Claudia tightly. Always running the show, aren't you? Lorraine followed, perfume clouding the entryway like fog. Nathan, dear, she said, air kissing my cheek. You look comfortable. Translation, you look underdressed. David arrived last with his wife, Valerie, who smiled too brightly for someone who clearly despised being there. He clapped me on the shoulder. Still teaching history, huh? Brave man. I barely remember my own. The laughter that followed wasn't mine, it was worse. It was effortless, casual, as if mocking me was family tradition. Dinner started beautifully. Claudia had outdone herself with the menu, and for a while, the conversation was civil. But then, as always, came the subtle cuts disguised as compliments. Claudia's campaign really put Whitmore and Company on the map, Harold said proudly. She's got your ambition, Lorraine. Thank you, Daddy, Claudia replied, glowing. I couldn't have done it without my amazing team. David smirked. And your very patient husband. Everyone chuckled. I forced a smile, but Emily didn't. She just stared at her plate, her fork motionless. Don't tease him, Claudia said lightly. Nathan's my rock. I mean, someone has to hold down the fort while I'm out saving the company. The laughter returned soft, cruel, practiced. I felt something inside me go cold. I wasn't angry anymore, I was numb. I'd become background noise in my own life. Emily shifted beside me, her shoulders tight. I could tell she was trying to breathe slowly, the way she did when she was about to cry but refused to let anyone see. Claudia raised her glass. To ambition, she said, her voice bright and commanding. To setting goals, breaking barriers, and refusing to settle. Her father echoed proudly, to our Claudia the example of what success looks like. Everyone drank. Everyone except Emily. When Claudia turned toward me, expecting a smile, I gave her one. It wasn't real, but it was enough. Say something, Nathan, she said. A toast, maybe? Don't be shy. I stood, the room spinning slightly. My hands were steady, though. To family, I said. The ones who celebrate you when you're winning and stand by you when you're not. The words hung there, heavy and strange. No one clapped. Claudia's smile froze for just a moment, then returned perfect, polished, poisonous. As I sat back down, Emily whispered, "That was good, Dad." Her voice was small, but it was enough to keep me breathing. Half an hour later, dessert was served, and Claudia began another speech, this time about women in leadership, about resilience, about overcoming obstacles. I watched her glow under the chandelier, her words flowing like honey mixed with venom. She looked unstoppable. Untouchable. But across the table, Emily's face had changed. Her eyes weren't filled with admiration or hurt anymore. They were filled with decision. And though I didn't know it yet, the next few minutes would turn that dinner into something none of us would ever forget. It happened right after Claudia's final toast. She stood at the head of the table, radiant in her red dress, her hand curled gracefully around a glass of champagne. The candlelight glimmered on her earrings, little gold crescents that swayed each time she turned her head. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman in control, adored, invincible. Tonight, she began, I just want to thank everyone for believing in me. This expansion wasn't easy, but it proves what happens when hard work meets vision. There was a murmur of approval. Her father looked proud. Her mother dabbed at her eyes. I just sat there, staring at the bubbles in my glass. The words hard work tasted bitter. Then Claudia turned toward me. And, of course, to my husband Nathan, she said, smiling sweetly. He may not always understand what I do, but he's always been supportive. Laughter light and elegant, like clinking china. I forced a grin. I'd played this scene too many times to forget my lines. But then she added, some men would have been intimidated being married to a woman like me. Luckily, Nathan's not the jealous type. He's well, comfortable in his simplicity. It was meant to sound harmless. But the words cut with surgical precision, slicing straight through my composure. Even David let out a small whistle. Lorraine giggled, and Harold shook his head approvingly as if her insult were a compliment to the family's sense of humor. I didn't look at Claudia. I couldn't. My fingers dug into the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white. The silence between us wasn't silence, it was humiliation dressed up as politeness. And that's when Emily stood up. At first, I thought she was just excusing herself from the table. She was trembling, her napkin crumpled in her fist. But when she spoke, her voice was clear, too calm for a 12-year-old. Mom, she said, her tone cutting through the chatter, I know your secret. The entire table froze. For a second, nobody breathed. Claudia blinked, the color draining from her face as if someone had pulled a plug inside her. Sweetheart, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like laughter, what are you talking about? Emily didn't blink. Her chin lifted. I know what really happened at work. I know who fixed your problem. The words dropped like stones into deep water. The ripples were instant. David's smirk vanished. Lorraine's fork clattered against her plate. Harold frowned, turning toward his daughter. Claudia's voice trembled, just slightly. Emily, that's enough. Sit down. But Emily didn't sit down. I saw the emails, Mom, she continued, her tone growing steadier with every word. You told everyone your boss praised you for saving the company. But it was Dad's research, wasn't it? He's the one who fixed it. Emily, Claudia hissed, her face hardening, this isn't appropriate. Neither is lying, Emily said simply. A wave of shock rippled through the room. For the first time that evening, Claudia's perfect mask cracked. She turned to her father, desperate. Dad, she's just a child. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But Harold's eyes had narrowed. Is it true? Of course not. Claudia snapped. Why would I need Nathan's help? He teaches history, for God's sake. Emily reached into her small purse and pulled out her tablet. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice didn't falter. Because he helped you anyway, she said, tapping the screen. He found the legal clause that cleared your firm. I saved the files, Mom. You told your boss it was your work. But it wasn't. The entire table seemed to lean forward as Claudia's world tilted backward. Emily, Claudia said, her voice now sharp and pleading at once, you don't understand the complexities of adult life. No, Mom, Emily said, her eyes burning. I understand perfectly. You took something that wasn't yours and made Dad feel small for it. You made fun of him tonight after he saved you. Lorraine whispered, Claudia, is that true? Claudia's lip quivered. It's complicated. Harold slammed his palm against the table. Answer her. The sound was deafening. Claudia flinched. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, yes. He helped me. But it doesn't matter, it was still my responsibility to tell the truth. Emily interrupted. To be decent. The silence that followed was total. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, slow and merciless. Claudia looked around the table, searching for Simeone Anianito to defend her. But even David avoided her eyes. Valerie stared at her plate. Lorraine dabbed at her lipstick, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on her napkin. My wife's empire, the image she had built so carefully, was collapsing right in front of her. And the demolition crew was a 12-year-old girl with a tablet and a conscience. Claudia's eyes finally landed on me. There was panic there, maybe even regret. But it was too late. "Nathan," she whispered, "say something." I looked at her for a long time. I think Emily said everything that needed to be said. For once, there was no applause, no laughter, no wine glasses raised in her honor. Only the sound of truth filling the room, heavy, undeniable, and freeing. Claudia stood still, her skin pale against the dark red of her dress. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She had nothing left to say. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't the one being humiliated. I was the one being seen. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if Emily's 6 words had drained the oxygen out of the room. The chandelier light flickered against Claudia's pale face, and the air felt heavy enough to choke on. Then Harold spoke. His voice was low, rough, like gravel sliding down a hill. "Claudia. Is this true?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted toward me, then to Emily, then to her father again, calculating, cornered, desperate. "Dad, please," she began, "this isn't the place." "This is the place," he interrupted, his tone suddenly sharp enough to cut glass. "You just humiliated your husband in front of everyone. If the girl says you lied, I want to hear the truth right now." Lorraine shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Harold, maybe we shouldn't." "No," Harold snapped. "We've all played along with her show long enough." Claudia's composure cracked like thin ice. "Yes, fine," she shouted suddenly. "Yes, Nathan helped me. But it wasn't like that. He didn't save me. He just pointed something out." Emily crossed her arms, calm as a judge. "He worked all night. I saw him." Lorraine turned to her daughter, her voice trembling. "Claudia, why wouldn't you just tell us that? Why pretend?" "Because it's humiliating." Claudia shot back. "You think I want to stand here and admit my husband, the history teacher, solved a corporate legal crisis? Do you know how that sounds?" "It sounds," Harold said coldly, "like he did something you should have been proud of." Claudia froze. For once, she had no quick retort, no clever spin. Her father's disappointment hit her harder than any accusation. David let out a long sigh and leaned back. "Wow," he muttered. "Guess this dinner turned educational after all." "Quiet, David," Harold barked. I wanted to disappear. The scene unfolding in front of me was surreal, half vindication, half heartbreak. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want Claudia crushed under the weight of her own pride. I just wanted her to stop making me feel small. But the truth had momentum now. It couldn't be stopped. Claudia turned to me, tears streaking her makeup. "Nathan, please," she said. "Tell them it's not a big deal. Tell them I didn't mean to make you look bad." Emily's voice rose before I could speak. "You meant every word, Mom." "Emily." Claudia snapped. "You're out of line." "No," she said quietly. "You are." The table went dead silent again. Harold pushed back his chair and stood, his expression dark and unreadable. "You've embarrassed this family, Claudia. You've embarrassed yourself. Your mother and I raised you better than this." Tears welled in Claudia's eyes. "I just wanted you to be proud of me," she whispered. Her father shook his head. "Pride built on deceit isn't pride, it's poison." Emily reached for my hand under the table. I squeezed back, not trusting myself to speak. Lorraine looked between all of us, her face softening. Maybe we should all take a breath, she said weakly. This is still family. Mistakes can be forgiven. But even she sounded unsure. Claudia's lip trembled as she looked at me. Nathan, please, she whispered again. Say something. I finally met her gaze. I think what you really want, I said quietly, is for me to clean up the mess you made. Again. Her breath hitched. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd once fallen in love with, fragile, human, scared. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said softly. I just didn't want to feel small. Neither did I said. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then Harold turned away, muttering, "This dinner's over." Chairs scraped against the floor. Lorraine gathered the plates wordlessly. David and Valerie made for the door, whispering to each other. The clink of silverware and shuffling feet filled the silence that words had destroyed. When the last guest left, Claudia stood in the middle of the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of her perfect evening: half-eaten dessert, spilled wine, and a daughter who had just dismantled her pride with 6 quiet words. Emily turned to her mother one last time. I didn't want to hurt you, she said softly, echoing Claudia's earlier words. I just wanted you to stop hurting him. Then she walked upstairs, leaving Claudia standing there, shaking and speechless. And as I followed Emily up the stairs a few minutes later, I realized something else had shifted, something irreversible. The silence that used to keep the peace had finally been broken. And no one in that house would ever hear it the same way again. That night, after everyone left, the house felt wrong. Too clean. Too still. Like the silence after an earthquake when the world looks the same, but the foundation underneath has cracked beyond repair. Claudia stayed downstairs long after the last dish had been cleared. I heard the faint sound of her heels pacing across the hardwood, back and forth, until finally it stopped. Then came the quiet sob I'd been expecting. Emily had fallen asleep in my bed. She'd curled up against me, her small hand clutching my sleeve even in her dreams. She hadn't cried, not once. I don't think she needed to. She'd said everything she'd been holding inside for months, maybe years. And now, for the first time, she looked at peace. I was proud of her and terrified for what it might mean. She'd told the truth, but the truth always has a cost. Especially in families like ours, where appearances mattered more than honesty. It was nearly midnight when Claudia finally came upstairs. The sound of her slow, hesitant footsteps made my chest ache. She paused in the doorway, still wearing her crimson dress, mascara smudged like war paint beneath her eyes. Is she asleep? She whispered. Yes, I said. She's fine. She leaned against the doorframe, staring at Emily for a long time. She hates me. No, I said quietly. She's disappointed. There's a difference. Claudia laughed bitterly. You sound just like your sermons at school. Calm. Reasonable. Like this isn't my entire world falling apart. I didn't answer. Because part of me knew this wasn't the end of her world. It was just the end of her illusion. She walked closer, her heels clicking softly. You think I wanted to hurt you? She asked. You think I liked making you feel small? I think you didn't care how it made me feel, I said. Not until tonight. She winced, then nodded. You're right. Her voice cracked. God, I'm so used to fighting every Anito, proving I'm worth something, that I didn't see who I was stepping on to get there. I looked at her, really looked. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't performing. There was no mask, no smirk, just exhaustion and regret. I was proud of you, I said. Even when you made me feel invisible, I was proud. But you couldn't stand that, could you? You needed to be the only one shining. Tears welled in her eyes again. You make it sound so ugly. It is ugly, I said softly. But it's also human. She sank down onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking. I don't know how to fix this. Start by telling the truth, I said. Not just to me, but to everyone. To your father, your company, your team. You can't rebuild something that was built on a lie. She nodded slowly, her head hanging. I don't even know if I can face them. You don't have a choice, I said gently. The truth's already out. What you do next, that's what matters. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The house creaked. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a stray dog barked. Then Claudia reached for my hand. I don't deserve you, she whispered. I sighed. Maybe not. But I think Emily deserves a better version of you. That hit her harder than any insult ever could. She squeezed my hand once, then stood. Tomorrow, she said. I'll call my boss. I'll tell them everything. When she left the room, I looked down at Emily. Her breathing was even, her expression calm. She had changed everything with 6 words, and she didn't even realize how monumental it was. Downstairs, I heard the faint sound of Claudia's voice on the phone. Not smooth or rehearsed, broken, honest. She was telling the truth, piece by piece, like a woman learning how to breathe again. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. Because the truth, no matter how painful, had finally made its way into our house. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start over. 3 months have passed since that night, since Emily's 6 words cracked open everything we used to call normal. The house is quieter now. Not the tense, waiting for an argument kind of quiet, but the peaceful kind that lets you breathe again. Claudia still lives here, though some days it feels like she's learning how to, all over again. She wakes up earlier, cooks breakfast with Emily, and sometimes stops herself mid-sentence when she feels that old, sharp tone creeping in. The woman who once filled every room with her pride now listens more than she speaks. True to her word, she confessed everything to her company, her team, her father. The fallout was brutal. Her boss reassigned her for ethics training, and the expansion project she'd boasted about was handed to someone else. For a while, she barely spoke. But when she finally did, she said something I'll never forget. I thought my career was what made me powerful. Turns out, telling the truth is harder and stronger than anything I've ever done. Harold came by a few weeks later, holding a small box of cigars and an awkward apology. He didn't say much, but when he looked me in the eye and said, "You've got more character than all of us combined," I knew it was his way of admitting he'd been wrong. Lorraine cried, of course. She always cried when things stopped looking perfect. David and Valerie never brought up the dinner again. They avoid the topic like a wound that hasn't quite healed. That's fine by me. Not every truth needs an audience. The biggest change, though, isn't Claudia. It's Emily. She's lighter now, like the weight of pretending has finally lifted. She laughs easily. She studies harder. And sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, she watches her mother, not with anger, but with cautious hope. One night, I caught them sitting together in the living room. Emily was showing Claudia a school project titled, Integrity, Doing the Right Thing When It's Hard. Claudia just nodded quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Later, Emily came to me. "Do you think Mom really changed?" she asked. "I think," I said, "she's trying. And that's a start." Emily smiled. "Good. Because I still love her. But I love you more." She said it so simply, so purely, that I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I still teach at the same high school. I still drive the same car, drink the same cheap coffee, and come home to the same little house. But it doesn't feel small anymore. It feels honest. And somehow, that makes it enough. Claudia and I aren't the same as before. We might never be. But there's something new between us: respect. Real respect, the kind that comes only after everything false has been stripped away. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'll sit beside me on the porch and say, "You should have left me that night." And I always answer the same way, "Maybe." But then Emily wouldn't have learned what truth looks like. She usually smiles at that, sad, but grateful. Looking back, I realize the night of that dinner wasn't our destruction. It was our reckoning. A 12-year-old girl taught two adults what honesty costs, and what it saves. Claudia's pride broke our family. Emily's courage rebuilt it. Now, when I look at my wife, my daughter, both flawed, both trying, I finally see something worth keeping. Not the image of perfection Claudia once chased. Not the silence I once hid behind. Just us. Honest. Imperfect. Real. And for the first time in my life, that's exactly enough.